Well, since we'll be having our trivia tonight, I thought I would ask a couple trivia questions. What was the first diocese in the whole United States? Father Ray probably knows this. What was it? Baltimore. Well done. Baltimore on November 6th of 1789. And who was the first bishop? John Carroll. All right, more of you knew that. What I want to talk about is that we have the same church happening today that we heard about in the scriptures. The same Catholic Church that Jesus found and that the apostles were beginning to bring about in the world is the same church that we have right here at St. Matthias in Parma, Ohio, 2,000 years later. It's pretty amazing. So when you hear in today's first reading this whole idea of they're calling the church together and appointing presbyters. They're appointing elders, as they call them, but that's Greek for presbyter, which means priest. And they're laying hands on them, and the apostles are beginning to spread the church. Now, the interesting thing is, the church goes where there's people. And so I want to talk about how the church spread and how we got to Parma, Ohio, from that very early church that began in Jerusalem. So, the first Catholic Mass that was ever held in the United States was in 1526 by a Dominican friar, and they ministered in San Miguel, Guadalupe, which consisted of colonies that were only 3 months that existed, so even before the founding of our country. First Mass on U.S. mainland. Anybody know that? St. Augustine, Florida. You knew it, huh? 1565 was the first Mass that was celebrated in St. Augustine, Florida. First Catholic chapel that was ever consecrated. Santa Fe, New Mexico, 1610. So this all started when people began to come to the United States, and John Carroll, who was the first bishop in the diocese, in the whole United States, was 1789. What else happened in 1789? Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. So right at the very beginning of the founding of our country, we have the first bishop. So as the country would begin to form, and as people would begin to come more and more into our country, the church would follow. And so the church began to move into the Northwest, and that's where I want to talk about how it came into Ohio. So the first diocese of Ohio, anybody know what it was? Cincinnati, not Cleveland. Are you cheating over there, Father Ray? Are you giving them sign language? Cincinnati was the first one. 1821 was the Diocese of Cincinnati. Oldest church in the diocese, or in the state of Ohio, St. Joseph Church in Somerset, 1818. All right, now we're going to get to Cleveland. So now the church is moving into Ohio, into Cleveland. Established April 23rd, 1847, with approximately 10,000 people living in the diocese. The largest church ever with the recorded history of people. So remember, at that time, 10,000 people lived in the whole diocese. At the height of the Diocese of Cleveland, which parish had the largest membership ever? Nope. Oh, who said that? You knew that?
I worked there.
Oh, she worked there. St. Stanislaus. St. Stanislaus at one time had 20,000 parishioners. Isn't that amazing? So, Diocese of Cleveland is formed. The first Catholic church in Cleveland is dedicated in 1840, and that was called St. Mary's on the Flats, and that would later become the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. First Bishop of Cleveland? Bishop Rapp. Now, I had Father Tift in church history, and he always told these really funny, interesting anecdotes, and he said Bishop Rapp was actually a tyrant. He was very mean to his priests. The only rights that priests have at this time were 5 bales of hay a month for their horses and a Christian burial. That's all the rights that they had. come a long way since then. So the first Catholics in Cleveland were German and Irish immigrants, and there was a big tension between the two of them. But we would continue to have more immigration and more people coming into the country. And at one time, within a 5-mile radius of downtown Cleveland, we had 19 parishes, each with their own ethnic group. So all those different parishes lived in a 5-mile radius. Okay, so now we got Cleveland is expanding, it's huge. And then we begin to move to the suburbs. So as the suburbs began to get formed, this story goes back all the way to 1872, just 25 years after the diocese was founded. In the rolling hills and green forests of the township of Parma, Ohio, there were 250 families that lived on these 30 square miles. There were 11 farm families who got together, mostly of German background, and they wanted to have their own priest. So 11 farm families, they knew it wouldn't be easy, and so they began to petition the bishop and bring people together, and they formed the first parish in Parma, Ohio. Anybody know that? Holy Family. And they called it Holy Family because all these families came together that wanted to be holy, and they asked if it could be named Holy Family. So then as the parishes continue to grow and Parma begins this huge area with all these Catholics, it's getting too huge to contain themselves. Some of these parishes, 5,000, 6,000 families at the time. And so the bishop, was it Gilmore at the time? I think it was Gilmore. When St. Matthias was founded. No. It was Hickey? It was Pilla. Hickey. 1980. Okay, 1980, Bishop Hickey. A year after I was born, by the way. They wanted, there was a Father Fiala at the time, and he wanted to experiment with smaller Christian parishes, smaller Catholic parishes. And so he made a number of these smaller parishes throughout the diocese, and St. Matthias would become one of those smaller parishes. He wanted to try to see, out of all these huge parishes that had thousands and thousands of families, what it would be like to have a smaller parish where people could be very close and very intimate. And so St. Matthias was formed off of St. Columkill, and it became a parish in June of 1980. First Mass was celebrated, Green Valley Elementary. And then Father Moorhan would hold a series of town hall meetings, which went disastrous. The people were upset. They didn't want to leave their parish. But those individuals that came here formed a wonderful parish. And many of our founding members are still here today. Raise your hand if you're a founding member of St. Matthias. Look around at that. Give them a round of applause. So they would soon find a permanent site, and in 1985, the parish would break ground for the first building on Sprague Road. At that time, Bishop Quinn would dedicate this building, and October 5th of 1986, the following year, the parish purchased a house on the adjacent property, which is now the rectory, and they began to renovate the church, which we have today. And when was this church built? 97? No, when was it originally built? 1986. It was originally a hall where Mass was celebrated, and then 1996 or 7, it became this church. Just want you to think about that amazing journey from Jerusalem. That after Jesus founded the church, he would empower these bishops to go out, and he would empower them to ordain priests, and he would appoint deacons to help with service, and the church would spread all over the world, and everywhere that people went, the church went with it. And 2,000 years after that amazing journey of faith, all the way from Jerusalem to the Americas, to Ohio, to Cleveland, to Parma, we have this parish. I think it's so good for us to know that we are built on an apostolic faith. We have this new Holy Father. And Father Ray said before Mass, this is the first time ever that a Holy Father was younger than he was. It's not happening for me yet, but But we continue to have this apostolic church for 2,000 years, this unbroken lineage all the way from the apostles, the early church fathers, the priests, the deacons, the lay people, all under the working of the Holy Spirit. We're here today because Jesus appointed Peter to be the head of the church, and that we would have apostles, we would have bishops, priests, deacons, lay people ever since, continuing to go wherever the people are.
One bit of